Does this look familiar? Does your stomach pooch forward? Do you have an increased curve in your low back where your butt sticks up and you feel weak into your core? Then take a listen. So as you see in that picture, that person is suffering from what you call anterior pelvic tilt or forward pelvic tilt. That's when looking at the spine here, as our pelvis tips forward, we start to notice an increased curve here in the low back, a butt that appears almost lifted, perhaps some pooching or forward stomach protruding there, and then oftentimes people complain of tight hamstrings. If you notice here, if we're envisioning our pelvis like a cup, that cup has tilted forward. It has begun to spill forward rather than sitting backwards in a rocked position here. So what problem does this pose? Well, when we have a forward tipped pelvis here, that's due to weakening of our abdominal muscles in the front, as well as our glutes and hamstrings in the back responsible for pulling that pelvis down. In conjunction, we'll often see tight lumbar erectors here, pulling that pelvis up, as well as tension into the front of the hips here. Those rectus femoris muscles, hip flexors, responsible for pulling and tilting that pelvis forward. So how do you know if you have forward pelvic tilt or anterior pelvic tilt? Here's two simple ways to test that at home. One being when you lie on your back, are you able to stick your hand behind your low back, almost noticing a doming of the low back, an ability to press it downwards. That may also look like, say, arching or tilting forward of that pelvis. The second alternative is the tilt back Thomas test. So you're gonna come up on the edge of a bed, edge of a couch, grab your knee and tilt backwards. We're looking for the opposite leg to lift upwards with it. I'll show you right here. So as we come onto the edge of the bed or couch, we're gonna grab one knee, lean backwards. We're looking for, again, this opposite thigh to lift up with it and look like this. So now let's run through some easy exercises you can do at home to try to correct this tilting of the pelvis. First, let's review how to pelvic tilt. Taking the base of our palms on the fronts of our iliac crests, we're going to create a triangle with the hands. Now, rocking the pelvis forward and backward, you'll notice the arrow points down when in anterior tilt and upwards when in posterior tilt. As I go down, you'll notice my back arches. As I come back into the mat, my back presses down. If you prefer to do this same exercise seated, say through your working day, it's just as easy. Placing your hands on the crest of your hips, you're simply rocking your pelvis back and forward. Easiest done when sitting on the edge of your chair. Now that we know how to pelvic tilt, let's put ourselves to work. You can see me check in that my pelvis is posteriorly tilted. I cannot fit my hand between the mat and my back. I proceed into just simple toe touches, checking in once in a while, again, to make sure I'm holding that pelvic tilt backwards. This is to be done at your own discretion. An alternative method, coming into our heel slides here, while holding up one knee, I simply slide the ankle away from my glutes and back towards. Again, checking in to make sure that that posterior pelvic tilt is held throughout. Now let's put those glutes to work. Again, you can see me checking myself to make sure that pelvis is tipped backwards. As I squeeze my glutes together, I'm lifting the pelvis off the mat. Before every repetition, you can see me alter the pelvic tilt, making sure I hold it throughout the exercise. This can be either held at the top for a given number of seconds or repeated up and down through a set of 8 to 10. This next exercise is not only designed to stretch the front of the hip, but again to target the glutes in the back. I'm doing a simple extension of the hip. You notice my back not curling throughout the exercise. It's important the movement comes from the hip and not the low back. I've given you two options here, one with a straight leg and one with a bent knee. If getting onto your hands and knees is not an option for you, I've shown you an alternative method here, standing. Again, I emphasize the importance of this movement not coming from the low back, but from the extension of the hip. We're firing our glutes with this exercise and stretching those quads in the front of the leg. A more advanced exercise here is a half squat. You can see me using the chair as a method of feedback for how far to go down. I'm bending at my knees, hips, while keeping my chest and low back straight. So out with the exercise, in with the stretches. Here, I'm going to show you how to stretch the front of your hip. I've brought my right knee up on a chair, leaning forward in, emphasizing that hip extension on the left. Note that I'm keeping my chest up and my low back relatively straight. An alternative method to this one is coming down into a lunge type position. Again, I've brought my right knee up. I'm leaning forward into it, feeling that nice gradual stretch in the front of my left leg. A nice curling low back stretch to finish. I like to start with one knee to chest, extending that opposite leg down. This can be done either on the floor or on the edge of a bed. After a few seconds, you're going to see me switch sides. Gives a nice torque to the pelvis as long as it's comfortable enough for you. Finishing by bringing both knees up to my chest, really curling through that pelvis and low back, holding for 15 to 20 seconds.